Shalom. Shalom.
Shalom.
Make sure everybody's awake. Okay. I remember mainline churches, I've heard that's a Sunday morning joke. Gotta make sure everybody's awake. Here we are on Shabbat afternoon and these guys to brighten your eyes a bit. Okay, the week's been long. I know this is a day of rest, but let's dig into the Word. I'm going to start a little earlier in my teaching than what Brother Yarden started his reading. As we talked about last week, the break between chapter 7 and chapter 8 of Genesis, which will be in chapter 8, the break is very unnatural. Okay? And the breaks, you have to remember, are not really there. They were put in for teaching and study purposes. But I think they lead to as much trouble as anything else. And so Yarden began by saying Elohim remembered Noah and all the beasts, but the verse actually starts, or the sentence actually starts before that. It says, and when the waters had swelled on the earth 150 days, Elohim remembered Noah and all the beasts, and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and Elohim caused a wind to blow across the earth, and the waters subsided. Now this is important because it gives us a glimpse of how much can be lost. You know, we talk about how the mainline denominations are really bad, in my opinion, and our elders' opinions, about picking and choosing, cherry picking as we call it, specific verses and using them to back up doctrines that aren't necessarily sound. And our big thing, at least in my ministry, and I know the elders tend to do the same thing, that very early on I started handing out Bibles and saying, here's a Bible, it's the same translation I teach from, make sure you read it, be read up before I teach, because you know I'm human. I'll never set out to mislead you, but I could be wrong. And it's your responsibility as a believer to study the Word and know what it really says, okay, so that you can then discern whether or not what I bring to you is actually a true rendering and a true explanation, exegesis, as they say in seminary circles. But here we see that it wasn't just that Elohim remembered Noah, and some people twist that and say, well, how can the creator of the universe forget? Okay, it doesn't say that he remembered him on that day. Okay, if you read the context, the Hebrew makes it very clear. It's saying that he remembered him the whole time. He remembered them the whole time. He never forgot about them. But it says that he remembered him specifically to go to him that day. And it says that he blew or caused the wind to blow across the earth and the waters subsided. At this point, and I get so aggravated, and I believed this growing up. I was told this. There was a flood for 40 days and 40 nights. Then Noah came out of the ark. As I said last week, it looked like a bathtub toy with the elephant and the giraffe sticking their head out the window. Windows. The picture was wrong. But here we are, 150 days after the first rains began. 5 months after the first rain began. And you got to know that ark is stinking. It's smelling bad. We talked about that last week. The feces is piling up, and the animals, just the sweat of the animals would have made the place stink. And they're waiting. And I'm not going to lie and say I think they waited patiently. I think Noah was pacing because his sons were agitated because their wives couldn't stand the smell. The fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were stopped up, and the rain from the sky was held back. The waters then receded steadily from the earth. Receded steadily. Okay, think about this. You know, we argue with people, evolutionists. We argue with people who believe in the Big Bang and things like that. And they say, well, the Earth has been here for millions of years. You can tell because the sediments of the Earth are in layers and strata, and this material all laid down together, and then that material all laid down together, and that would take millions of years because one would have to pile up and harden, and then the other would have to pile up and harden, and then the other would have to pile up and harden, or we wouldn't have these exact strata. Well, the thing is, unless you take a very carefully posed or planned snapshot, the strata aren't perfect anyway. They were broken or jutted. But it says here that after 150 days of water piled on top and everything under the water chaos, and all of the earth is covered with water, and after 150 days, the water begins to recede, and it does so steadily. That means at an exact, in the Hebrew, that means at an exact rate. It didn't go fast right now and slow later. It began to recede steadily. And elsewhere in Scripture, we read that when he ended the flood, he raised the mountains and lowered the valleys, and the waters all went down into the lower positions. And we know that as the earth cooled, a lot of it froze and became the polar caps, as we call them. But if the water receded steadily, and you can do this in an experiment, get a container, I don't care what it is, get an aquarium, fill it with water, put different types of soil and material on top of the water, and then slowly drain the water out of that container. If it's an aquarium, make sure it's one with a plug on the bottom. Pull it out, and you watch that water drain at a steady rate. That rate doesn't change. It goes down and down and down. What you're going to see is that the types of material come together in like form. You're going to find that if it's potting soil, I used to do this when I TA'd biology, if it's potting soil, the potting soil will come together in a layer. Okay, if it's sand, the sand will tend to fall and descend in the water at a certain rate, and it'll come together in a layer. And what you end up with is something that looks like strata. Okay, so when people say, "Oh, these millions of years had to have happened," they're not taking into account this verse that it receded steadily from the earth. If it had receded chaotically, then maybe they would have a point, but it receded steadily. And I don't believe it's an accident that that word is put in there. I believe that Elohim inspired that particular word to be put there so that we would be able to look at it and say, okay, that makes sense. I understand now why the earth looks the way that it does. At the end of 150 days, the water diminished, so that in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Okay, so it's the 17th day of the month. Remember how I told you, I think it was last week or the week before, I told you that when Elohim does things, he does them exactly. He does them specifically. Okay, we talked last week in the prophet's teaching, in the Nevi'im, that when you know one of the signs of a true prophet, number one, what he says does not contradict Torah. And number two, what he says comes true specifically, not vaguely, specifically. Well, here, Elohim decides he's going to destroy the earth in a flood. He starts it on what? if you look back to last week, the 17th day of the second month. And the floodwaters begin to recede, and the ark comes to rest on one of the mountains of the Ararat chain. When? On the 17th day of the 7th month. Exactly by the lunar calendar that he gave us in the first chapters of Genesis, exactly 5 months to the day. Is that an accident? No. That is exactly what he had planned. Secondly, you notice the word here says mountains. It says, and the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. This is important because when they found what I believe, I truly do believe, are the fossilized, I can't speak today, the fossilized, petrified remains of the ark, they did not find it on Mount Ararat. And this is where a lot of skeptics said, well, you see, your Bible is wrong. If that's the ark, then it's in the wrong place. But we don't believe it's the ark because we don't believe that story anyway. But if you go back and you read the Hebrew, and I love how the JPS translates this, it does not say on the mountain of Ararat. It says in the mountains of Ararat. Okay? The mountains of Ararat is a chain of, I used to know a number, an estimated number of how many mountains were in that chain, but there are quite a few of them. It came to rest in the mountains of that region. And about, I want to say it's about 3 mountains down from actual Mount Ararat is the mountain where the remains were found. The waters went on diminishing until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Now think about that. So in the 7th month, the ark comes to rest on a mountain. Okay? 3 months later, almost, probably about 2.5 months later, I guess, on the first day of the month, then they were able to see the mountains. Now, I want you to think about that. How much water would the ark have to displace for it to take 2.5 more months for the waters to recede so that the tops of the mountains could be seen? Okay, and people say, well, there's no way that it was this many cubits long and this many cubits wide, this many cubits tall. That you know how big that would be? Well, it's not like today. It's not like you're going down the Ohio River and there's 15 motorboats you gotta, weave around and avoid. It was the only thing out there. On this vast expanse of water that was slowly receding, and yeah, it came to rest. It got stuck on a mountaintop and couldn't go anywhere. And 2.5 months later, the neighboring mountains could be seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he made and sent out a raven. It went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. Now, people read this and they love to take this out of context. And they say, well, see, 40 days, 40 nights. At the end of 40 nights, he opened the window and threw the raven out. No. At the end of 40 days, after the 150 days, okay, after the ark has been at rest for 40 days, he sent the raven out. Then he sent out the dove to see whether the waters had decreased from the surface of the ground, For the dove could not find a resting place for its foot, and returned to him to the ark, for there was water over all the earth. So putting out his hand, he took it into the ark with him, and waited another 7 days, and again sent out the dove from the ark. Okay, so here we are. We were at 100 and where's that post? 190 days. We're 7 days farther. We're 197 days into the flood. This is again, he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came back to him toward evening, and there in its bill was a plucked off olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the waters had decreased on the earth. You see, at this point, he couldn't even, he's 997 days into the flood, and he's still, all he could see was water. But he knew that the waters were receding because he found an olive leaf in the dove's mouth. Sometimes it's the little things, those little signs that Elohim gives us that we miss until it's put right in front of us. He waited still another 7 days. So what is that? 197 and 7 is 204 days. And sent the dove forth, and it did not return to him anymore. So here we are, 204 days into the flood. You think it's over? 204 days into the flood. Do you think it's over? No. In the 601st year, now we're talking about Noah's life here. In his 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the waters began to dry from the earth. And when Noah removed the covering of the ark, he saw that the surface of the ground was drying. The first day of the first month. It's the beginning of the lunar calendar. It's the day by which all holy days are counted. On the first day, the first day when the first new moon could be sighted for the first month, he looked out and saw the ground was drying. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Remember when he went into the ark? It was the second month on the 17th day. Now it's a year later, the second month on the 27th day. Do you see why I get mad when preachers lie and say it was 40 days and 40 nights? Do you understand why when I called an old college professor, after I became a believer and I was studying the Word and I was arguing with him about millions of years and days, and I said, so I've been reading that any object that is underwater for an extended period of time, you can't carbon-14 date because it skews the rate at which the carbon-14 breaks down. He says, oh yeah, that's absolutely true. It's skewed by millions of years. Okay? I said, so what about if it's under salt water? He said, then absolutely. There's just no way you can ever carbon-14 date something that's been underwater for an extended period of time. I said, so what you're saying is that we can't carbon-14 date anything that existed before Noah's flood. And he said, oh, you're one of them now. And he hung up the phone. You want to know why science says things are millions of years old? It's because they were from before the flood. Oh, this fossil had to have been laid down over a long period of time for all this silt and whatever kind of earth, this stone to lay down a certain way, okay, at a certain rate, and it'd be buried in that rock strata. And if it's in that strata, that's funny because I've seen fossils that cut through 3 or 4 different strata. Okay, so did it take it 5 million years to die? No, it died during the flood. And it died in a position that caused it to be covered by several layers of different things as the water receded at a steady rate. That makes scientific sense. And anything, if it died prior to the flood or in the flood and was covered during the runoff from the flood, then it cannot be carbon-14 dated accurately. And that, folks, throws out the entire Big Bang evolution argument right out the window. God, or Elohim, spoke to Noah, saying, "Come out of the ark, together with your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives." You know, even when he saw the earth was drying and he knew it was probably safe to go out, he didn't take his family out. They've been in there for a year and 10 days. For a year and 10 days, they have been living with livestock and dealing with the odor. And still he waited until Elohim told him to come out. "Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds, animals, and everything that creeps on earth, and let them swarm on the earth and be fertile and increase on earth." It's creation all over again, folks. So Noah came out together with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. Every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that stirs on earth came out of the ark by families. You always find that interesting. We'll talk about how they went into the ark by kind. They came out of the ark by kind. A year and 10 days after they went in, these animals should have been beyond stir crazy, and yet they walked out in an orderly fashion. What is Elohim not the author of? Confusion. Okay, that's what Scripture says. He is the author of order and structure. Then Noah built an altar to Jehovah, and taking of every clean animal and of every clean bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. Jehovah smelled the pleasing odor, and Jehovah said to himself. No, it doesn't say to himself. It doesn't say to the other two parts of him. It says to himself. Never again will I doom the earth because of man. There are a lot of people who read Revelation and they say that Elohim destroys a third of the earth, and then a third of the earth again, and kills a third of the sea, and then a third of the sea again. And Elohim does all of these horrible things. You know, that's not how I read it. And part of the reason I don't read it that way is because of what I just read here in Scripture. That he will never doom the earth again because of man. I read Revelation that Elohim has stationed angels to guard against the destructive hand of man. And then when he reaches the time when he says, "I'm done, no more," then those angels are allowed to pour out the bowls of wrath, which is a picture of, okay, we've been collecting all of this damage that you're trying to do to the earth, people, and they just release it. It's not held back anymore. You know, right now the Pacific Ocean is dying. whole sections of it have no life in it. Why? Because men thought that they could play God and change the laws of physics. And there's a nuclear reactor that just keeps running and running and running that nobody can shut off, and it keeps pouring toxins into the ocean. Never to doom earth because of man, since the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth. Nor will I ever again destroy any living being as I have done. Says, okay, I did this once. I'm giving you all a fresh start. Don't screw it up. Guess what we did? So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And people say, but the seasons are changing. That's not true right there. It doesn't say that they won't change. It says they won't cease. There will always be cold and hot, cold and heat. There will always be a summer and a winter. There will always be day and night. Nowhere does it say, because people say, well, days are getting longer. If you do the astronomical count, we're getting a few minutes longer, like every 10 years, it's like a minute longer or something like that. If it's that. Actually, I think it might be longer than that. I have to look it up. But has the day and night ceased? No, we still have day and night. We still have summer and winter. We still have cold and heat. We still have seed time and harvest. Now, it may get to where seed time and harvest are farther apart, or the harvest isn't as plentiful. But there will always be these things, so long as the earth endures. Questions for Midrash? Yes.
Only question is the thought that as Noah removed the cover of the ark. Before that, there was only that one window for fresh air and light, and you said that. I think you're right. I think you do wait until Elohim left the ark. But I can just imagine, he removes this covering, and then all this fresh air starts coming in, and then like all his family is like around it, and he's like, "Don't leave yet," and they're like standing right there because they're so sick of smelling all these animals for over years. So they're all just like standing where the fresh air is coming in. That's probably that. I can't say for sure, but I could see that happening. That's kind of a fun thought.
Anybody else?